Hi everyone, welcome to this evening's event. It's hosted by Waterstones. I am Sophie Hannah and I'm delighted to be here to celebrate the publication day of Tana French's latest novel, The Searcher. I am delighted to have been asked to interview Tana, who is my favourite living crime writer. Without any caveats or exceptions, Tana is my very top fave living crime writer. So let's welcome Tana to the Zoom stage, and then I'm going to be asking her questions. And I would love it if you would all have questions for Tana as well about The Searcher, about her work in general, and you can put your questions in the Q&A section. And then I will ask them at the end and Tana will answer them. Hi, Tana.
Hi, Sophie. Thanks a million for doing this. And while I can, big thanks to Waterstones for doing this as well.
Yeah, Waterstones are top chaps for sorting this out. I've just been telling everyone that you are my favourite living crime writer without exception.
Thank you.
And that remains true. Every single book of yours that I read, I hope it's going to be as good as all the others, and it always is. And I've just finished, like yesterday morning, I finished reading The Searcher and I absolutely loved it.
Thank you. It's a bit different, this one.
Well, so yes, let's go straight into me interrogating you about The Searcher. So, I'm interested to know how, to what extent do you think it's similar and different from your other work? Because for me, there was one respect in which it seemed very different, but it didn't seem to be the respect in which reviewers had said it was. Because reviewers seem to be thinking that the main difference is that it's kind of, rather than just straight crime, it's kind of a bit Western-like, but also with crime and Western blend. Did you see it as a sort of departure?
Well, there's definitely that element. Like when I'd been starting work on starting bouncing ideas around for the book, I had been reading a load of Westerns and I was thinking, oh, some of the settings of Westerns have a lot of resonances with the west of Ireland. Like you've got that harsh country that demands a lot of physical and mental toughness from anyone who wants to make a living off it. And you've got kind of that sense of a place that not just geographically, but culturally is very far removed from the centers of power, so that the people feel like the power brokers don't know anything about their lives. They don't care. And if you want a society that's stable and functional, you're going to have to make your own rules and you're going to have to enforce them yourselves. So I started thinking about taking some of the tropes of the Western and seeing how they did in the west of Ireland. Which of them are going to need transposing, which of them will have to shift, which of them will work as they are. So there's an element of Western in it, all right, but I didn't really see that as the biggest difference. I'd say the biggest difference from my other books is a lot of them are really introspective. Like the main site of the action is within the narrator's head, and that's why they're all first person. I think it's because that's where the main action is inside the main character. So you need that access as a reader. You need to be able to see the main character's every thought and response and feeling. Whereas for this one, I was writing about a main character, not a narrator, to whom action is much more important than words or thoughts. He doesn't feel that you're defined by what you say, what you feel, what you think. None of those really matter to him. What defines you is what you do. That's what makes you who you are. And so that meant that the book needed to have a lot less introspection, because the narrator doesn't care about the introspection. He wouldn't feel that it was crucial in any way for anyone to see inside his head in order to know his story. And that's why the book's in third person, because from his perspective, all you need in order to know someone's story is to see their actions. So to me, that was the big shift, is thinking of somebody in terms of his actions rather than his thoughts and feelings.
That's so interesting, because the big difference that I noticed, it's the same thing, but I phrased it differently to myself, and I hadn't made that exact connection, but I think it's exactly what you're saying. To me, the big difference was that it was in the third person.
Yes.
And so And so it was interesting because there's still, you know, the way you brilliantly describe the landscape and the relationship between people and place, and just the sort of vividness of the physical reality, which is just done so brilliantly in this book and in all your books. So that was the same. But I kept thinking, all the way through, I kept thinking, it's so weird that the only difference is that this is third person, not first person, and yet it really is quite a difference. Like
Yeah, well,
it makes a difference, and I think everything you've just said explains why, right?
Yeah, I mean, it gives you a different relation, you as the reader, a different relationship with the main character if you're not seeing him from within, and it
Yeah.
also makes for a much, I think, a much more reliable narrator, because if you're seeing someone from inside, then you're seeing everything through their thoughts and their biases and their fears and the way they want to see things and their selection. Whereas if you're seeing a third person narrator, there isn't that sense that the narrator is your lens. The narrator isn't consistently skewing everything for
Yeah.
you the way a first person narrator automatically does. Your relationship is very different. It's less intimate, but it's in some ways more stable, more solid.
Yeah, yeah, and it's one of the sort of, I mean, I'm nowhere near as familiar as you are with Westerns because my dad was massively into Westerns, massively into Westerns, and he would like encourage us all as a family to watch them when I was little. And I think I was basically too young to appreciate their finer qualities. So I would just look at every Western and go, it's another guy in a hat in a dusty desert landscape. So I'm not an expert, but what I do remember of my childhood Western watching was that very often a Western started with an enigmatic stranger coming into town.
Yeah, absolutely. That is exactly what I was thinking of with this. When I was thinking about what are the Western tropes that I want to play with, that was the first one. Was the stranger in town, because he does. That's what in Westerns, he rolls into the saloon and probably he's, dusty from the road and he's keeping a few secrets to himself and he won't answer questions about his past. And he's going to be a catalyst. He's going to be a disruptor. Maybe he will, he'll shoot the corrupt sheriff and he'll set the town to rights. So he's going to shoot the hero and it'll all go down in flames, or else he's going to get shot himself because he pokes his nose where it doesn't belong. But either way, he's going to disrupt the established order and he's going to bring hidden things to light, quite likely. And I really liked the idea of playing with that in a small town in the west of Ireland. And that's why he's American as well, is that he had to be a proper outsider. He had to be like someone no connection to this town.
And that worked brilliantly. That worked brilliantly with
the American thing. Cool. But I like that.
Given that he's being this stranger who rolls into town, from the reader's point of view, again, to get the most out of that Western element, it's great that he's in the third person, because like, imagine the Western Shane, but where we're in Shane's head. If you're in someone's thoughts and getting every detail of their thoughts, then they're not going to be mysterious and enigmatic for very long, are they?
Not particularly, although again, I still think there's room for different kinds of enigmatic in a first-person narrator, because they can be lying to themselves, which means they're lying to you, and you get many more of those layers and those ins and outs in a first-person narrator.
Totally. But not in a Western-y way, though.
No, and there are Westerns that are first person, though. There's True Grit and there's The Sisters Brothers. There are first person Westerns, but they're done differently.
I've never read Western. I've only ever watched them. When my dad made me watch them, so I've never read any Western novels. But it's just that thing of, the one thing you don't get with a third person narrator is that sort of, I often think, like, I just want to know what that person's thinking, even if the thoughts add a layer of enigmaticness. Just that inability to know what they're thinking, I think, makes it brilliantly Western-like in that sense.
The remoteness, the sense of being
you can't see the thought.
Absolutely, the inscrutability. It's hard to be inscrutable in the first person.
So now let's talk about the crime aspect of the novel, because it is very much a mystery as well, and a suspenseful puzzle with a solution. How important was that part of the book for you?
Well, it mattered obviously that's what propels the book. That's what the arc that keeps it moving. But to me, the whodunit is, it's never the most important part of the book. Now I love it, and I like whodunits, and I like that arc. But to me, it's more about who is the narrator, or in this case, the main character. It's more about running them against a decision where whatever call they make, it's going to define the rest of their lives. That's the big question: is what are they going to do when they're in this corner, and whatever they do is crucial? What decision are they going to make that defines them? So it's more who is the narrator rather than who is the murderer. But the crime aspect really matters, partly for structural reasons, I think, because I write long mostly. Like, this is not a short book, and it's the shortest one I've written by a good shot. And I think if I didn't have that structure, the A kills B and C finds out who done it, if I didn't have that through line that boxes off the book, I'd just keep writing. It'd be 200,000 words, and I'd be like, I don't know, is it finished? Is it not finished? Who knows? Whereas this actually makes me stop.
Yeah, but this book is, I mean, I always say to people when people are saying, how long should my book be? Writers often say to me, how long should my book be? And I always say, I don't know whether you would agree with this, but I always say, there is no should. It's not that a book, it's not that there's an acceptable range of lengths that are acceptable, and anything less or more is unacceptable. Every story has its sort of ideal length contained within it, and I always cite your books as an example of books which are generally quite long but absolutely feel as though every single bit is necessary. And when I'm reading your books, I never think this is a long book. I always think, oh, this is, you just get so, it's part of the immersiveness actually, that for example, if you've got a dialogue scene or a conversation scene in any of your books, it's kind of so detailed and lifelike. It tends to be quite long and involved, but you're absolutely riveted throughout, and it feels really pacey, so it doesn't feel long. And that's something I love about your books. This book is noticeably shorter than some of your others. Was that also maybe something to do with the sort of spare aesthetic of Westernhood?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's defined by the narrator, though, because I find that the shape of book is very much defined by the narrator. Very early on, when I'm writing something, like as soon as I've got a good sense of the main character, I've got a decent sense of how long this book's going to be. Like with The Witch Elm, my last one, I was like, this is going to be a tome. This is going to be an encyclopedia. Whereas with this one, I knew it was going to be short from knowing who the narrator was. And once he is that stranger in town who walks into a Western, there are not going to be great big 5-page passages of stuff about his inner life. It wouldn't fit with who he is. It's going to be tighter, sparer. So not just the Western, but the Western demands a character who's going to be tighter. Like, there are great long Westerns. There's Lonesome Dove, which is a tome in itself. But that if you're focusing very much on one character like I do, and he's a Western character, that's going to tighten things up a lot.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So in terms of the mystery aspect of the book, would you say that, I mean, you said it's sort of structurally crucial, but in terms of the importance of it, do you see it as being mainly important because it allows the main character a chance to, is the crime plot important because of the effect it has on the main character? Is it that way around usually?
Yeah. It's all about the character for me. That's where I start from. That's what I understand best, and that's where the plot comes out of. Like, when I start writing a book, I've got the main character very clear in my head, but I usually don't have much of the plot. Like, I had the basic premise here. I knew that he's this guy who's taken early retirement as a detective, and he's come to live in this small town in Ireland, and then up pops this kid demanding that Cal should investigate his big brother's disappearance. But that's all I had of plot. That was it. And that kind of shows up within the first couple of chapters. Because it all comes out of character. I've got to write the characters for a while before I figure out who would do what to whom and why. So the mystery does become, it shapes itself around what the character needs, not the other way. I think there are so many entry points into a book. Like, I know writers who write the other way around. They've got the outline of the plot, and then they go, which characters need a plot like this? but I do it the other way around.
Yeah, yeah, and in fact, that's what I do. Exactly that. So my books always start with either what I think is a brilliant plot hook for the beginning of a book, or a brilliant solution for the ending of a book, and then I work my way forwards or backwards. But it always starts with a plot idea, and then I think, okay, so what kind of character would this plot be perfect for?
And what about the other characters? Are they popping up around what does the plot need? What does the other character need? Or do they just all come as one whole bundle?
So once I've got the plot hook, which is always either beginning or ending, then I think, okay, who would it be brilliant to put in this situation? Who do I need as my main character or characters? And then from then on, because once you've got a person and a big event or a significant plot point, then I find that things just add themselves gradually. And it's, I mean, I don't know whether you agree with this, but I find that when people say, so how did you write this book? How did it all come together? I kind of don't have a memory of it. It's just like, you look at the book when you finished it and think, well, that all came from somewhere. But do you find it very hard to remember exactly what the process was of which bits you added to the idea when?
Yeah, there are always a few bits where I'm going, no, I know exactly when that popped up because it became necessary as I wrote this scene. I suddenly realized that this scene would have to go this way. Or I usually have like the last couple of paragraphs when I'm about halfway through, even though I don't know how I'm going to get there. I have the last couple of paragraphs. But yeah, I have the same thing where stuff kind of pops up along the way as you go, because you're so focused on it that your subconscious is doing useful things and throwing bits and pieces and new characters in there. And occasionally I don't know about you, but I find that you start writing a character just because they seem like they'd be fun to write. And then chapters and chapters down the line, you realize, oh, I've got a great use for this character. They're perfect. They're exactly what the plot needs. And you're left not knowing if your subconscious popped up with the perfect character or if you've been quietly shaping the plot in that direction without realizing it.
Yeah, exactly. So we're not going to do any spoilering, obviously, because lots of people might not have read the book yet, but the ending and resolution, for me, it's perfect because it does exactly, and many of your books do this actually. Yeah, many of them do. The first one definitely did. I won't go through them all in my mind, but this one definitely does it, where everything is resolved, as in you know what happened and why and who did what. But there's also, I don't know whether to call it ambiguity, but there's stuff for the reader to think about, wonder about, and have opinions about as well, isn't there?
I hope so, yeah. Because there is ambiguity about whether, was this the right thing? Was this what should have happened? Justice served? If not, how could it be better served? Because there's a lot in this book about right and wrong. Like, this is a big moral crux for Cal, for the main character. And this as well, I don't know if you remember enough of those Western films from childhood, but Westerns are big into right and wrong. They're very much about morality and the complexity of it. There's always, in Westerns, there's a lot of stuff about how people who are mostly good can do bad things and vice versa. And sometimes there's a situation where there is no right thing to do. And all kinds of people can find it really hard to cope with that. And I found it really interesting that, okay, there's always a drive to make right and wrong simple. You always get people going, this person liked a vile tweet on Twitter, so they must be evil. End of story. Done. No more thinking needed. Or on the opposite side, this person regularly does terrible things to other people, but he says he's a religious person, so he must be a good person. End of story. No more thought needed. And Westerns, they don't simplify like that. They make it really clear that morality is a complex thing. There isn't always a simple answer, and they don't try to gloss that over. They don't try to deny it. They don't try to explain it away. They just lay it out and let you deal with it. So if I was going to be writing something that was Western tinged, there had to be that focus on the intractable complexity of morality. And that kind of necessitated, for one thing, a main character who's very conflicted and tangled up about his relationship to his own moral code. But it also necessitated an ending where there isn't a simple right or wrong, and there isn't a sense that either, yes, justice has been served, or no, justice has not been served, where it's much more conflicted and grey than that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's what I mean. Like the resolved bit is, you know, what happened and who did what, but the unresolved, well, it's not unresolved, but the ambiguity is a moral ambiguity.
Yes.
Yeah, which
Because
I think works brilliantly. Now, have you had, because I know, didn't this book come out in America already a few weeks ago? I'm really curious to know whether you've had any communication from readers along the lines of, tell us what we should think about the moral ambiguity. Because the reason I ask is because I've written at least 3 or 4 books where because I love books where you know exactly what happened at the end plot wise, but that there's some big moral question, or like where the reader's forced to go, oh, hang on a minute, what do I think about this, either morally or in some other way, or like, what do I think this means? And whenever I've done that in a book, I get so many emails from people saying things like, what am I supposed to think about?
yeah,
And I always reply and say, you're not supposed to think a particular thing. It's an opportunity for you to decide what you do think. But are you in fact asking me what I think? And they always write back and say yes. So what I've found is that when you put that moral ambiguity in, people basically want to know, they kind of want a bit of a steer from the writer. But have you had any responses like that to this book?
not so far to those. I've had a couple of people, a couple of interviewers going, so is this in fact the right ending? Is this what should have happened? I don't have an answer to that. And on a couple of levels, I don't have an answer. One is I genuinely don't know whether I think it's the right ending. I think Cal comes as close as he is capable of to doing the right thing by his own code, which presumably means, yes, it's as close as you can get in a situation where there may be no right answer. But also, I'm quite a big believer in the idea that once the book is out into the world, I don't really get an opinion anymore. I don't have a right to an opinion. It's the readers now. So their opinion, whatever it might be, that's the one that counts. If you think that Cal has been made an atrocious mess of this, that counts. Or if you think, yes, he did the best thing he possibly could under the circumstances, that counts. But what I think no longer has any more say than anyone else's, because if I thought anything, I should have put it there in the book more clearly. So clearly I didn't.
Yeah. No, I just wondered whether people had sort of asked, because I mean, one of my books in particular, this happened with, and I got hundreds of people saying, what are we supposed to think?
Which one?
A Room Swept White. So, oh,
Right.
you didn't read that
That's
one?
the only one I haven't read. But it's not the one. You got a load of people going,
yeah,
what are you supposed to think? And what did you tell them? In the end, you just went, I don't know.
In fact, no, actually, it was slightly different. It wasn't, what are we supposed to think morally? A Room Swept White, I'll just say for anyone who doesn't know, is about 3 women who are convicted of killing more than one of their babies each, and they maintain it was cot death, and they all are convicted of murder based on the testimony of this one expert witness, and then that expert witness's testimony is proven to be completely useless and unreliable, so they're all released on appeal, and then somebody starts murdering the women who have been released on appeal. That's sort of the murder mystery. But so you find out by the end of the book who is killing those people. You definitely find out. You find out why. It's all tied up. But what you never find out is whether those women who are released on appeal did or did not murder their babies that they were in prison for killing. And hundreds of people wrote to me and said, did they do it? Were they innocent? Were they guilty? And they basically just wanted to know what I thought. And it was funny because I completely agree with you. Once the book is released, it's totally up to everyone to have their opinion. And I didn't think my opinion was any more valid than anyone else's. But what I noticed when these emails started pouring in was that I did in fact have an opinion. Like, I did feel I knew in my head which of them had and which of them hadn't. So I thought, well, since I do have this information, if they want to know what I think, I'm willing to tell them. But so it wasn't a moral ambiguity. It was an unsolved, a bit like you did in the woods.
Yeah, that's the one where I get that. I get people emailing, go, so what actually happened? Just very briefly, in the woods, there is 3 children run into a wood to play. Only one ever comes out. and he has no memory of what happened to the other two. But 20 years later, he is a detective and he's investigating a murder that draws him back to that wood. So that's the basic premise of that. And there is one mystery left unresolved at the end of it. And aiming not to spoiler here, but for me, again, it's about character. It's about the character of this detective. What leaps will he make? What way will he choose in the course of this story? And so, to me, the question that's left unresolved isn't, in fact, the big question of the book. The big question isn't about who done it, what happened, whatever. It's who is he underneath, which is, in fact, answered fairly clearly. So that's what I always say, is that that's not the question to me about the book. And I have a general idea of the answer to the question people are asking, but not specifics. Yeah. I'm not going into it.
Yeah. And I remember when I first read In the Woods, I remember saying to you, you probably don't remember this, but this was when we were doing quite a few road shows, weren't we? And we kept sort of meeting and doing events. And I remember saying to you, because I didn't want you, because I didn't know you as well then as I do now. And I thought you would think I was very crass if I said, so tell me what happened. But I remember saying, I'm not asking you to tell me what happened.
Totally were.
But do you know? And you said yes.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, good. Like, I didn't even want to know, because I actually really loved the fact in that book that there's another murder mystery. Well, there's a murder mystery where, like, you do get the answer and everything's tied up. And I actually love the fact that there's that bit that is wrapped up, and then there's the element where there's still a mystery. I thought that worked really well. Speaking of which, so how many books have you written now in total? What number?
This is the 8th.
The 8th one. Do you have a favorite of all your books? In fact, let's ask people to put in the Q&A if they have. I would love to know if you all have a particular favorite among Tana's books, because I do, and I will reveal what it is in a minute. But Tana, do you have a favorite? And if so, is it the same answer as the answer you'd give if I said, do you think of one as the best? Like, is your favorite the one you think is the best or not? Or
no, they're not. They're definitely not. I think, okay, in many ways, my favorite is probably Faithful Place, because I think it might be the one that does what I set out to do best. And also because it was so much fun to write. Like, Frank Mackey is just plain, he was huge fun to write on a sentence by sentence level, because I think he's not a person who tries very hard to be a good person. He has his priorities, which are his city and his job and his kid, and he will do right by them if it kills him. But everything else he doesn't particularly care. It's just about getting the job done. And if you're somebody who does try quite hard to do right by other people and do the right thing, and who does think about that a fair amount, it's a lot of fun to have a holiday during your workday where you don't give a damn about any of that because your character doesn't. So I found him huge fun to write. And I think the book works more solidly than some of them, which can be structurally, there are weak points in some of them. I think that works very well. But my favorite, deep down, I'm always going to have a soft spot for In the Woods, because it was my first book and I was a very broke actor and almost no one knew I was even writing it. Like, practically nobody knew. So there was this real sense of it being me and the book, and the tiny chance that someone would want to publish this and that it would make a difference, completely transform my life. But the fact of it being just me in the book with no expectations, nobody even knowing, there's something special about that. So I'm always going to be especially fond of that one. I really like this one too, though. The Searcher was a lot of fun to write. Cal was good to spend time with. Yeah.
So do you think you're, long after they're written and published, whether or not you're likely to think of them as like one of the favorite ones, is that affected by the experience you have while writing them? So, like, if you enjoy writing a book, do you think you're likely to think of it as more fondly than, say, a book? Like, are there any of your books that were harder or less enjoyable to write?
Oh, Broken Harbour was no fun to write at all.
That's my favorite one. I feel guilty now, but
it's a depressing book. It really is. I always feel like when someone says, "Oh, I've just read Broken Harbour," I feel like I should should go, I'm so sorry, I depressed your whole week. I just, no, I didn't find that one a lot of fun to write, partly because, I had a newborn and it's a big, long book and it's hard work. And I had a very depressing idea, which I had before I had a newborn and probably would not have used afterwards. But, there I was with a deadline and only one idea. So I found that one less fun. But I wonder if it's almost the other way around, whether the experience of it and the fond memories, whether there's no way I'm going to have fond memories of it, not necessarily because it was hard to write, but the same kind of book that's hard to write is hard to remember with fondness. I have to say I remember most of them. I've had a lot of fun writing most of these. I loved writing The Likeness because it was a lot of fun to spend time in that house. I really enjoyed going back to that house every day when I opened up my computer.
Yeah. I love all of them, but I love The Likeness because of it. I love books that are really ambitious. And I think with The Likeness, the premise is so high octane. Like, it's a very ambitious premise, and that just makes it more suspenseful and more enjoyable from the word go. As soon as you read the blurb, you're like, I have to carry on reading this book and see what on earth could be going on.
That was an interesting one that I got a lot of questions about, and I thought that was the basic premise of The Likeness is a detective is called to a murder scene where the victim looks exactly like her. And I got a lot of questions about people going, could that really happen? And I thought that was very interesting because it played on genre expectations. Because if this had been filed under, say, I don't know, literary fiction or something like that, I think people would have had a lot fewer problems with the deeply unlikely premise. But because it's filed under crime, we have certain expectations of the level of probability, level of plausibility that it should have. And I thought that was very interesting, just that on a different bookshelf, it wouldn't have had the same questions raised.
Yeah, that is interesting, actually, because you would think it might be the opposite way around, actually. Like, you would think that within the crime and mystery genre, we should be allowed to consider anything that could conceivably happen as plausible. Because that, in a way, that's the point of the genre. If you think of something like And Then There Were None or Murder on the Orient Express, what makes them so amazing within the genre is that they both take things which could scientifically happen, but they're probably not going to happen every day of the week. And therefore, they extend what the genre, they extend the amount of surprise that the genre can contain for the reader. So I would argue that the crime genre should have maximum leniency in the area of plausibility, whereas a general fiction novel, it doesn't have any special excuse for having an unlikely. Well, I would actually be very lenient with all books because I have strong views about plausibility. I get cross about this. This is one of the many bees in my capacious bonnet, which is I think that if something could happen, if it's scientifically possible, then there's nothing wrong with having it happen in a book. And I think often when people say, well, that just couldn't happen, what they mean is, I've never heard of this happening in my daily life. But in fact, somebody looking exactly like oneself is something that could happen.
Or near enough to pass for yourself. Yeah, near enough to pass for oneself. I had a really weird experience. I was in a bookshop in the US on book tour for The Likeness, and one of the bookshop staff came up to me and said, I saw you in the airport reading yesterday I was picking up a friend in the airport, and I saw you there with holding a copy of your book. I nearly came over to say hi, but I didn't want to, which was fine, except that I hadn't flown into that city until that morning, so it had definitely not been me the day before in the airport with a copy of The Likeness.
And I mean, who knows how reliable that person was? Maybe they just, but I mean, genuinely, it can happen. And this is going to sound ridiculous, but I had a music teacher at secondary school who was the image of the singer Fergal Sharkey. Like, they were interchangeable. If you'd put my music teacher on Top of the Pops instead of Fergal Sharkey, no one would have known the difference. So I just do that automatically when I'm reading crime novels. I always think, could this happen? However outlandish or unusual, could it happen? And if it could, even once, then that is my definition of plausibility.
I get more annoyed about, I don't like implausibility of character. I don't like where you get a character who's one kind of person all the way along, and then with no character coherence, they suddenly flip into somebody else because the plot necessitates it. I don't like character implausibility. I don't mind odd implausible events.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
the characters have to hang together.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us a bit about your writing process. I mean, we've talked about how an idea sort of originates, but what do you have like a very set routine when you're writing a book? Do your days sort of follow the same pattern, or are you more just whenever you can fit it in? What happens from like first idea to delivery of book? Do you do lots of drafts or?
I write funny. I mean, usually, of course, the last 6, 7 months, everything's completely up in the air and weird. But normally, I've got little kids, so while they're away at school, that is my writing time. End of story. I'm naturally nocturnal. I'd write until 3 in the morning and then get up at like 10, but that's not on the cards. So I write while they're at school, and it's amazing how much you can get done when you know that at a certain time, people are going to come slamming in the door demanding snack. So it focuses you, it tightens you up, I think, definitely.
And is that sort of solid writing time? So what do they leave at like 8 o'clock or something? Is it like 8? I mean, I'm partly asking this because whatever you do, I'm sure it's better than what I do, which my systems are really inefficient. But like, is it like when they leave for school, you're head down writing till the second they get back, or do you do admin-y things as well in that time?
I'm not very good at that many things. I think a lot of it looks like spacing out, to be honest. There's an awful lot of messing around and looking at nothing and doodling on things. But I think our brains need that. Your mind needs that in order to get stuff done. So I may look like I'm folding pieces of paper into a million little pieces, but your brain's ticking away. Or I may look like I've ditched this all and gone for a long walk, but your brain's ticking away. A lot of what I do is the daydreaming that we got given out to in school for doing. It's just daydreaming that now has a focus and a place to go.
Yeah, yeah. And then how long will it take you to write a book? Is your average sort of working day part daydreaming and part writing? And like, do you sort of is there a typical number of words that you might write in a day when you're sort of doing a first draft?
This is going to sound like a really low number because I only write a book every 2 years, partly because I write long, but also because I edit as I go. So if I get 1,000 words done in a day, I am absolutely delighted with myself. But that's because I've edited and re-edited yesterday's and maybe last week's and that bit from last month's that's relevant. So I only finish my first draft, like a full first draft, a couple of weeks before I hand in, because I've been editing as I go. So there have been holes in it up until a couple of weeks before I hand in.
Right.
Every other bit is probably a 7th draft by then, but the whole first thing isn't actually in place until 2, 3 weeks beforehand.
Wow. Okay, so really it's the first draft that you edit it as you go along, but you don't sort of read it all through from the beginning. You just send it off and wait for edits.
No, I take a break. I finish the first draft, take a week to clear my head, and then spend the next 2 weeks just going through the whole thing, start to finish, to see if I, suddenly introduced a character in chapter 11 and then, forgot about him for however long, just to make sure there's no great big holes in it and to knock out a load of it. Because in first drafts, I throw in everything in the kitchen sink and then a certain amount of it needs to go.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. So what has the process or the like when you sit down to write your next book, say book number 9, or even when you sat down to write this one, how is it different being the writer you are now from when you first started, or is it not different? Is it sort of the same?
Oh, really interesting one. It's definitely, it's so different because I was completely winging it within the woods. I had never tried to write a book before. I'd written short stories, I'd written like really galactically bad teenage poetry, but I'd never tried to write a book before. And I didn't know how to go about it. And there are things like how to structure something that I had never thought about before, how to structure an entire book, how to get a character arc that goes through an entire book. And the character arc was comparatively easy because I came from an acting background. So I knew about how a character arc needs to shift in the course of a play, how you need to move a character step by step from A to B. But how to structure something, I had no idea. I was wrestling with that structure the whole time. I still don't consider it my strongest point, but I have a lot more of a clue what I'm doing structurally now. I should do.
Would you say you find it easier now writing a book than you did at first?
Not.
Because I think it's easier and harder in different ways.
Okay, explain how. How do you think you're easier and how do you
so I think like you were saying about structure, I mean, there are things now that are just much easier because I know I've developed my inner editorial sense. So if I'm likely to do something that's not going to work, instead of doing it, looking at it, thinking, I'm not sure, and then changing it after several months, I now just like my inner editor pops up and goes, no, that won't work. And I can sort of anticipate mistakes so that I don't make them. So from a sort of craft point of view, it's easier. I think the way in which it's harder is back into that emotional state where it's all new and exciting for the new book, even though you've written lots of books. I think that's possibly the hard bit, because I remember the feeling when I was writing my first book and my second book and my I had it for 3 books. It's a bit like a romantic relationship, you know, when you first meet someone and you're like, oh, I'm going to meet them tonight. I'm so excited. Is it going to go wrong? Oh my God, is it going to be amazing? Like that sort of frantic, passionate energy. Looking back at the writing of my first 3 books, it really made it amazing. Also, there were some low points, but it was just this amazing kind of emotional experience. Whereas now I guess that, you know, writing books is just like what we do. It's to a certain extent, it's just the day job. So that I find, like, I always try and like scare myself or excite myself or make something very different so that I can bring that sense of a high stakes feeling to each new book.
I still love it. I still feel as passionate about it and just can't wait to get back to it every day. No, that's lasted. I've been lucky. That's lasted. I think what I find hard though, right, is there are expectations. There are people who, with the first book, there's no pressure at all. You have no reason to think that anyone will ever read this besides you, which, you know, has its downside, but also has its upside. But then once you start, you're getting emails from people going, I really enjoyed your book, or I'm going to buy your next one. You're going, oh God, they're going to stake their time and money on this. It better be good because nobody has enough time or money to waste. So I better not let them down. So that sense of pressure that somebody is prepared to stake on you.
Yeah.
That's what I find a little bit more difficult going, I don't want to let these people down.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. You just said that you absolutely love it and can't wait to get back to it. And we've got a question here from Asim Wahid, who says, name one thing you enjoy about being a writer. I'd actually want to add to that and say, like, name everything you enjoy about being a writer, because one thing that I've always been very impressed by with you is that, like, you always talk about how you just love writing. And in that sense, I think you're possibly a very good exception to the rule, you know, because lots of writers, although on one level we all obviously love writing, lots of writers, when it is their day job and when it, you know, when they don't have a day job and writing isn't their escape anymore, a lot of writers start to have more sort of duty-like feelings about it. And maybe, I mean, I remember a friend of mine who's a massively best-selling writer said to me, I'm thinking of stopping. And I was like, why would you want to stop? Every book you write is like massively adored and popular and bestseller. And he just said, all the joy has gone out of it. I just don't enjoy it. He didn't give up writing. He found a way to enjoy it again. But I'm like really impressed by your continued enthusiasm. So like talk a bit about what you love about writing.
Okay, here's the thing. I'm coming from acting, where unless you're much more sort of driven project manager, organizational type than I ever am or ever will be, you're dependent on other people to give you permission to work. You're dependent on some director to cast you and say you are allowed to do this thing you love doing. Whereas when I started writing, that was one of the most amazing things, was the realization that I didn't need anyone's permission. all I needed was a biro, and I could work whenever I wanted, for as long as I wanted. That freedom was unbelievable. And I still have that sense. It still feels like this unbelievable surprise that I get to do this whenever I want. No one can stop me. No one can say, nah, not today, try again some other time. So that I still get a thrill out of, however many years later.
I find that so inspiring to hear. You've actually made me want to write tomorrow more than I did. Now let me ask. Now there's a question here, and I'm going to add a question to it. So the question here is: we've just entered lockdown 2.0, and winter is coming. Can you recommend some really great immersive reads to see us through? And I will add to that my question, which I was going to ask you next, which is, who are your favourite writers, and which writers inspired you to want to be a writer?
Oh, okay. So Watership Down, which is an amazing immersive read if you haven't read it. And it's so hard to describe because you say it's about a bunch of young rabbits who strike out to find themselves a new home, and it sounds completely weird, bizarre, possibly cutesy, and it's not like that at all. He just sucks us into their world so that it's not just that the characters aren't just little furry humans. They see the world differently. Their experience of it is different, and you come out seeing the world slightly differently for having read it. And I read it the first time when I was like 7, and I can't have got more than about a quarter or a third of it. But I loved it anyway, and the writing is beautiful. So that's high on my list. And Michael Chabon's The Yiddish Policemen's Union, there is one that is immersive and will drag you straight in. It's a noir novel, but it's this great, big, wildly original alternative history one where a tiny snippet of Alaska has been turned into an alternative Jewish homeland. And in its last days, this sort of battered, grizzled detective is investigating a murder. And the writing's beautiful, the imagination is wild, the characters leap off the page. There's another amazingly immersive one. And since I need a Western, seeing as, The Searcher is a little bit Western, Lonesome Dove, which is a story about a group of men and one woman who are taking a herd of cattle from Texas up to Montana in the 1870s, I think it is. And it interweaves all the characters and how they run into each other along the way and how their crisscrossing affects all of their journeys. And it's a great book, and it's the one that started me on this Western kick. So it's a lovely book. And A Brief History of 7 Killings, Marlon James. There's another immersive. That will drag you straight into his world, and your mind starts working in his rhythms after a while.
Yeah. Okay, now someone else has got a question. Hold on, I've just discovered that I can move the questions up and down. You talk about the expectations of a crime novel being limiting for a writer. What do you think about genre definitions, and do you subscribe to them?
Oh, I think genre definitions make a lovely starting point, but not a particularly lovely set of rules. Like, they're nice, they're great things to play with. It's really useful to have a set framework, a structure, a skeleton that you can build on. But if you start seeing them as endpoints, then I think they're very limiting. If you start seeing them as things that you have to stick to, then yes, there are a limited number probably of books that can be written within these 4 corners. But if you start playing with them, start twisting them, you've got a whole other set of possibilities. And that tradition of playing with the genre boundaries, that goes back a really long time. Like if you look at Patricia Highsmith, who in The Talented Mr. Ripley decides that, all right, I'm going to have you all empathizing with the murderer and hoping he gets away, and being on the edge of your seats when the police get too close, going, oh God, don't let them get him, don't let them get him. That's playing with the boundaries. Or if you take, Agatha Christie being one of the great stalwarts of the genre, and yet in The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, she was a groundbreaker there. That was a complete game changer. Those are the books I like. Those are the mysteries I like, the ones that use those conventions as a lovely place to start building rather than as the be all and end all.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant answer. So are you broadly happy for your books to be in the crime section of a shop? Like, yeah,
sure, why not?
I am too, but like, you meet the odd crime writer who says, why can't crime fiction be in with general fiction? I never agree with that personally, because I like, the kind of books you've just described that take the genre stuff as a starting point and then think, what can I do with this that's interesting and different? I love interesting and different, but I do still want to be able to find those books in a section of the bookshop where I know that the books I like are. So like I would hate it if all fiction was just in a general fiction section. I like to be able to look for a specific kind of book.
I mean, I don't really believe that the genre boundaries exist to the extent that we're told. It's there did used to be a perception, I think, that crime it's got gripping plots, but the characterization is probably pretty two-dimensional, and the writing's workmanlike, and there's no thematic depth. And on the other hand, over here we have the literary fiction with the beautiful writing and the deep characterization and the themes, but the plot is probably not much. And that was never true. There was a perception that it was, but I don't think it ever was, and I think that's eroding. But I think it's nice to have the section, as long as you don't have too stringent expectations of what you're going to find in that section.
Yes. Okay, 2 more questions, which I want to make sure. Oh, 3 more questions. Right. We're going to pick up the pace here. Maria wants to know, is it generally more difficult to use a male narrator as opposed to a female narrator? Or do you find it equally?
I find it totally depends on the narrator, because when you're writing, once you're writing any kind of fiction, you're automatically writing people who aren't you. And some of them will have more in common with you than others. And that's very little of that is dependent on gender. Like I have more in common with my best male friend than I do with, Paris Hilton or somebody like that. So that's not the big definer that makes a narrator more difficult or less difficult. The most difficult one was the narrator of Broken Harbour, who's the kind of guy who's very into the rules. You've got to follow the rules. You can't just go on your own sense of what's right, wrong. You have to do what the rules say. And I am very much not like that. So I found him quite hard to write. But it wasn't because he was a guy. It was because he as an individual was very different from me.
Yeah. Somebody says, if The Searcher was made into a film or TV, who would you want to play Cal if you could cast any actor as Cal?
Oh, I don't know. Occasionally I do write parts with an actor in mind to play them. Like often it's somebody I know and they're nothing like the character, but I'm going, oh, I'd be really good playing this part. But for Cal, I don't have any ideas. I think it's because I've finished the book quite recently, so he's still in my head very much as himself, rather than as a character played by anyone else.
Somebody wants to know when the next Dublin Murder Squad book is coming. Notice they've phrased that question in a way that assumes one is coming, hopefully with the aim of getting an answer that one is.
Oh, I don't know. I do want to go back to it because I think there are a lot of stories and characters in that world that I'd love to play with some more. But at the moment, I don't want to get trapped into writing the same book over and over. I think it's quite easy to do, especially if you do write in a genre where those basic parameters are quite fixed. I'm always on guard against the trap of going, okay, well, I know how to make this work, so I'll just keep doing that rather than trying something different every time. And I think a few standalones will help me make sure that I don't fall into that trap with the Dublin Murder Squad. But I will. I am planning to get back to it sooner or later.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I think, when you go away and do something different, it just makes everything fresher. And when you do go back to a series after doing standalones, you go back for a good reason, not just because you assume that's what you're going to do. Okay, 1 more question, and it's quite a weighty one, so that's good. We've got 3 minutes to answer it, or rather, you've got 3 minutes to answer it.
I'll take that.
Somebody says, all of your novels seem to respond in some way to a moral crisis that we are going through as a society, as well as being completely timeless. What was it in society that you were thinking about when writing The Searcher?
See, I don't deliberately do that, kind of engage with the big questions that are,
excuse me,
bless you, that are weighing down our society. But I think crime fiction of all the genres tends to slide that way, because if you're writing about murder happens in every time and place, but it happens for really different reasons depending on the society you're in. You're not going to get a murder over land ownership in a wandering nomadic society, but you might very well get a murder over land ownership in rural Ireland, where land is so deeply charged with so much emotion and history. So the minute you get a murder over land ownership, you're saying something about that society, about its priorities, about its dark places, about its fears, about what matters most, what is so important to that society that somebody could get killed over it. And one human being could take another's life over this thing. So I think the big moral quandaries in a society and the dark places seep into crime fiction much more readily than into some genres, just naturally. So I think I've done that kind of almost accidentally when I start thinking about what society this crime could spring from. What are the big things? What are the things that matter enough for someone to kill another person over? That's a big thing that you're dealing with when you write crime fiction. That's one of the biggest mysteries in the world, is what brings out that darkness in a human being. And I think you end up saying things about society that you didn't necessarily plan on doing. Like, I've never intended writing a State of a Nation novel, but you somehow end up with elements of that in there, whether you mean to or not.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Well, we have come to the end of our hour. Thank you so much, Tana, for discussing your new book, answering all the questions. Thank you to Waterstones for hosting this brilliant event. And thank you to all of you who came to the event from your living rooms, but nevertheless, it still counts as coming to an event. Tana's new book, The Searcher, is out today, published today, and available from all good Waterstoneses near you and online. And it is absolutely brilliant. So, you know, buy it and make your lockdown experience immediately much better.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of you for coming. And I found that I've needed kind of books and theatre and film and all that stuff much more over the last few months with lockdown. And I really hope that if you end up buying this book, which please do, and please do from Waterstones because they rule, I hope it makes your lockdown, just a few hours of it, just takes you away from the tough bit and makes a few hours a little easier.